Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of the Late Night Brew, where we talk brews first and we get around what we're supposed to after. Joining me for the fourth episode of this Tenant-to-Tenant Migration series is once again Joe. Welcome back, buddy.
Hello, thank you for having me once more.
And plenty of times after this. Spoiler
That's
alert.
right. Hmm.
Now, before we get into what all we need to consider when we're planning for and accounting for it, you know the drill. What are you having with me today?
Oh, you know me. I'm pretty boring when it comes to my brews. So today it's just good old-fashioned Lipton iced tea in my Snoopy mug. So
Very nice. I love tea, and when it's cold out, my wife and I drink a
yeah.
ton of it. So I have a golden ale, Bad Birdie, which actually is pretty
Mm,
good. Which is supposedly their peach ale, just without the peach. It's really good, actually. Quite light,
interesting.
very fruity. Yeah.
Yeah, not too bitter. Hmm.
No, no,
Hmm.
it's one of those where you're definitely gonna unintentionally drink it a little bit quicker than you were planning. Speaking of planning, of course, how's that for a terrible segue? When we're planning a tenant-to-tenant migration, what all are the different components that we really need to consider?
Hmm. Yeah, that's a talk about a loaded question, right? Because there's just so many. The age-old construction axiom, measure twice, cut once.
Yep.
Planning obviously is key in the tenant migration, and one of the most key components of it is discovery, right? Making sure you do your due diligence on the discovery aspects of the migration, because there's just just an enormous number of different types of use cases that you might need to address in a tenant migration, right? It could be as simple as, okay, yeah, the customers are both in 365 natively, and so you're truly doing just a tenant-to-tenant migration. But most often that is not the case, right? Many companies still have on-premises Active Directory. They're usually in a hybrid identity configuration with 365. And so now you have, those considerations as well. Are both organizations in that same scenario where they're synchronizing identities? Maybe just one is and the other isn't, or vice versa, right? So all of those types of scenarios, right, are going to feed into understanding what you actually have so that you can properly plan the proper path forward, right? What's your end state really
Definitely.
going to look like ultimately? Yeah.
Yeah, and
Mhm.
not to mention all the different bits and bobs within 365 that
Mhm.
users potentially can be
Mhm.
using.
Mhm. Yeah, well, what I usually do is do a full inventory of the licensing that's in the particular tenant as well, so that you're at least familiar with what entitlements and services are available to the customer. And then what you have to do is you have to start digging into each one of those. All right, because as we mentioned before, there's, of course, you're going to use a migration tool for these types of migrations, but the migration tools don't move everything, and so you really do have to have a plan for all of those services that don't move as part of an automated tooling process.
Oh
So,
yeah, or
mhm,
the pieces parts that don't allow any kind of automation or admin
mhm,
style of pulling
mhm,
out. And
mhm,
hey, Mr. User, if you want to keep this, this is what you have
mhm,
to do. This is
mhm,
we can't do this for you, and if you don't do it,
mhm.
that's you.
That's right. That's right. Yeah. So the customer has to make some decisions as well, right? As far as, not just what they're using, but, priorities with regards to workloads and, what they're going to have the users do themselves versus the admins and so forth. Yep.
Yeah.
Hmm.
Besides, and that's easily a rabbit hole we could get
Hmm.
into.
Hmm.
Besides, as you mentioned, the inventory and knowing what licenses and what's activated by their
Hmm.
license, what else can we be doing to ensure that really we've got everything or are aware of everything that needs to
Hmm.
move?
Well, validation testing, of course, functional testing, making sure that the migration is going to go as advertised. But then, of course, with any migration, you always want to do some type of pilot with real users too, right? Because, and you want a good representation of those pilot users across the business, right? Because each individual, depending on what department they're in or such, might be using different line of business apps or different types of services on the back end that the business would never be aware of, right? Although they see the user license for something in particular, they may really not know whether or not they're using it or not. So think of like a Power App or Flow or something like that, right?
Or the add-ons or potential other ancillary pieces to like Office apps, the VBAs, the macros, that type of pieces, parts that
Oh yeah.
might not be visible, and the other organization might have questionable attitudes towards in their environment.
Yep. Yeah, and you bring up another good point, is that alignment between the security and governance between the two tenants is absolutely critical, right? You might have one organization that's pretty loose and the other one that's a little bit tighter. And again, depending on which direction you're going, it could be a huge impact to the end user on the way they operate going forward, right?
Yeah, definitely. That's a very good point. Maybe that's yet another episode we haven't even thought of yet, is the security side of it. Unfortunately, though, that is our time. So appreciate it. If there's any questions, feel free to reach out. The information is always below. Until next time, Joe, appreciate it, sir. Take care.
All right. Take care. Thank you.